All right. So this is Angelique from Angelique Guides Infrastructures for Conscious Leadership and Collective Healing. And today we're on another conversation about the work with Shoshana Brown. I'm so excited about this. And I think for me, so we're doing these conversations with different folks, really pulsing to what does the work look like, what's present, what's missing, and where are we at? Because I think this is just one medium of many, right? Videos and social media is just one of many to engage, and shouldn't replace activism or advocacy. And I think we're living in such an opportunity for all of this to be present, to support us, for folks who can't get to each other, don't have support in certain ways or in certain intersections. And so our conversation today is really about, what's present, what's missing, strategies, life support, and actions. So we'll just move through the questions and you can rock it. Shoshana and I met at the first Jews of Color convening, which is like badass in and of itself. It was an amazing experience. And so I'm gonna put it over to you, Shosh, so that you can introduce yourself and just lay it down.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Shoshana Brown. I am a healer, a dancer, an organizer. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm trained as a social worker, so I work with youth, and I'm also a member of the JFREJ, that's Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, Jew of Color Caucus, doing anti-racist work inside of the Jewish community, along with I have a long history of doing prison justice work, so doing anti-prison work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know you're like super badass. I was thinking about that yesterday. I was like, she's super badass.
I try.
So our first question is from your perspective and kind of your viewpoint. What's present in the work? And when we say the work, it's kind of funny because I think some people sometimes are like, what the fuck is the work? And so the work to me is the one of being the healer, of being the one who stands for equity and justice. It's both multidimensional, intergenerational work of collective healing. And so in our context is like we talk a lot about like the intersection of racism, and we have the conversations around Jewish community in that, and just community as a whole, etc. So what for you is present in the work from your perspective?
I think right now the moment is so ripe for really digging in deep and doing good work. So right now I feel really present to just recommitting, like, what does it mean to fully show up as myself, no holds bar, and create space, and make space and have space be there and leave space for other folks to show up in the same way, and that be an experience that works, that's not friction, but that feels whole and complete. So the work for me right now is really about finding the spaces in which I can show up as my full self. I think part of what feels oppressive or has felt oppressive in my life has been like spaces where I am always siloed, particularly as a Black mixed race woman of color, Jewish woman of color. I've always had silos in my life. So spaces where I'm Jewish and not Black, or I'm Black and not Jewish, or I'm neither and I'm thought of as Latina. It's like all over the place. And so for me, what is really important right now and what freedom looks like is reclaiming the space where all of my values, beliefs, traditions, spiritualities have a space to be totally self-expressed at one time. In one moment in time, I can be like, I can be all things at once. So I think this year actually is a beautiful moment where that is actualized and represented in our current time, not just politically and what has happened. As you mentioned, we had the Jew of Color convening, a national convening of over 200 people that came together that I was part of helping to co-create as we modeled and were inspired by the national convening for Black Lives, for with the movement for Black Lives. That was the summer before, so a full year and a half ago. But really in this moment, so one thing that's beautiful is in Jewish tradition, the leap year adds a full month. So not just like in the Christian calendar or the sun-based calendar, you add a day, or you subtract a day, right? But in the Jewish calendar, you actually add a whole month to the year. And this year was the leap year. And so an extra full month, a full 30 days was added into the calendar, which pushed all of the holidays back, meaning that last year Hanukkah was celebrated like almost in November. And this year, Hanukkah is literally being celebrated at the same time as Kwanzaa. Right. So as a Black, Jewish, mixed race woman of color, I can like light my menorah and my Kanara at the same time. Yeah. And that feels super special to me. And that has happened before, but not in a space where I owned it, right? It happened when I was younger. And so there's one thing when you celebrate or partake in ritual with your family, and this is just what your family does. And then it's another thing to actually choose. Right. And that to me is feeling really free. And so lately what's present for me in the work is actually being with the self. And I think that's timely. We're in winter. It's all about dreaming in the dark, going within, finding the self, dreaming up the next year. So I think it's really timely that that's where I'm at. It's not about being out in a community and going to rallies and organizing actions, which I do and I love and it's great. And I think what is most impactful for me right now is finding those intersections of my spirituality and being with me and my ancestors.
Yeah. Shit, that was so good. I'm like, wait. But yeah. And I feel like one of the things I've been sharing on social media is like integration. And how we're at such a catalytic time energetically where we like it's ripe and opportune to step fully into to fully bloom into who we are, but more so in a way that we're able to own that in space and time. And not just like this, it's fully integrated into our reality. And to me, the questions like I keep on asking is, are you living integrated? Am I living integrated? Is there integration in my life so that we're not, fractured into all these pieces? Because so much of the external society demands that fracture, right? Here you should be one thing and here another. And so really looking at how in the time to come, the deep resonant call to be fully integrated, both soul, mind, and, or soul, mind, and body, and community and self, and whatever home and family look like for us, but really like, you know, bringing that fullness into its, because we move so cyclically. And so thanks for highlighting that, because I think that that looks so different for so many of us, and being present to that and to what that's looking like now and what that's feeling like, because I think that that's an important, like, dropping into what that feels like as a person becomes imperative for sustainability. And that's what I think a lot about. I think about sustainability in our work, sustainability in our movement, sustainability in the timeline that we are living in the generation that we are. And what does that look like? And how are we doing that in a way that allows us to do the work in all its manifestations until our last breath is gone? So ashe and amen to that.
Yeah, I think like that's what's showing up, you know, like that's what's showing up, not just for me, but that's what I'm seeing. I think there is something beautiful about so many people really reclaiming Indigenous traditions, Indigenous spirituality, and really reclaiming that in a way. And I think that's revolutionary, and that's part of the work itself. It's not, we have to have, you know, for liberation, there has to be complete liberation.
Yes.
Our liberation can't be just in policy. Our liberation cannot be just in the streets. It has to be in policy. It has to be in the streets. It has to be spiritually. It has to be in family. Like, yes, this morning I was just reading this article about what it looks like for couples to come together, and like, how do they decide what name they choose, right? And what is in the feminist tradition, and like, how do feminists approach this question? How do we think about it from an anti-patriarchal perspective? All of those things. And I think like that's the liberation work. Like, it's not only going to be found in the streets, and if we neglect those other pieces, then we're missing something big, you know? And the question that I've really been thinking of and really been playing with is what does the liberation theology of the day sound like? What do our people need right now? From a theologian's perspective, you know, I was just having dinner with a friend of mine who's at Union, and those are some of the questions that we've both been digging at and thinking about. You know, each movement, each moment in time has had its basis or resting or foundation in some kind of theology. You know, Martin Luther King was a reverend. You know, there was the whole Black church movement and the work that Black churches did. And now that we're seeing our social justice movement move sometimes away from this church, and sometimes are impacting the church to move along with them. And a lot of moving away from the church because folks are not feeling safe in the church or the synagogue or what have you, because of the oppressive structures that exist within that, because of the heteronormative white supremacist like structures inside of those churches, inside of those institutions. The question then becomes, if we are moving towards that space, then what is there? What are we replacing that with? What is there for us? And what kind of gospel do we need to hear right now? You know, that's what I'm interested in. I don't know. I don't think I'll create it, but I'm interested to be on that journey to find out, or to lend to the creation, to be part of the atmosphere that that theology is birthed in. You know, to be part of the clerical movement that is thinking about this
Yeah.
and doing something different with it, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so good. Yeah. I feel like, to me, like when I'm talking about like conscious leadership, it's this capacity to pull in and keep tabs on all these pieces as we're like the living embodiment of all of that.
Yep.
Right. And really asking the questions that are gonna, like, again, back to like this idea of, I often tell folks it's this like continuum. We're showing up for our work in this time, in this generation. There will be a generation after us, and so on and so forth. And so it's like, what's pulsing for us now? How can we show up more fully to that? And how can we, what does it, and this is and kind of what we were talking about the other day on our call, like the intergenerational piece, the, like tapping into the wisdom and the support of the elders while understanding the change and shifting of the new guard. And that's, I wrote about that, I think yesterday. I put it on social media. I'm like, the guard has been changing. Now, the examples that I use are like, Prince, David Bowie, like all these folks that are just like passing away, who were radical in their way of expression at a, like, where you could see it, right? Like in that way. Here we're having an entire generational transition. And what does it look like to create space in a way that we are connected to not only our ancestors, but our present elders, and that our elders are building their capacity to release to what needs to happen now that may look different than their generation. And then our generation's capacity to kind of pick up the baton and know that we're on the journey toward that elder journey. And so how are we holding the conversations, and how are we keeping in tune with all the frequencies that are coming in, right?
Yeah. I mean, since we were talking about that, I've been thinking deeply about that. And unfortunately, to be honest, like I don't see right now in the spaces and spheres that I'm in, a prime example of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Like in the best imagining of what is possible, I'm not seeing that, and it's a tightrope.
Yeah.
It's a tightrope walk. It's not, it's a very hard balance to hold, between loving and accepting and being open to new strategies and new things that work, while still feeling like, as an elder, you're honored, you're valued, your knowledge and tradition are valued. I'm seeing very different extremes of folks totally letting go and being like, it's yours, here, take it.
Yeah.
And other folks that are sort of like, no, it's mine. Like, I'm going to teach you how I do it, and you're going to do it how I do it,
Yeah.
With very, very limited space for innovation in that.
Yeah.
And I think, like, damn, that is so hard, Like, I think what we're dreaming up and what we're requesting is so hard. I would love to hear and see examples of where that is done so well that it feels soul satisfying.
Yeah.
I don't know that, like, with a few exceptions,
Yeah. And that's what somebody asked me the other day, what do I mean by active visionary? And they were like, I like that word. I want to hear what that means. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'd love to tell you about it. I love making up words. And the idea of the active visionary is the fact that our imaginings, they are sexy and they're beautiful. And they're challenging because we don't exactly see it manifested right now, or clear examples of that in a way that we see how it works and how it impacts. And so often enough, we're speaking into something that is like futuristic because it's talking about what's possible as we're moving forward, while still living in a very present reality where we're burnt out, we're tired, we're fatigued, where there's a large part of us, whatever our context, in terms of whether it's a religious context or whether it's a movement context, the generations before us definitely come from a very tight structure of you create who you are based on your educational capacity or like your hierarchy of seniority in something. That is what defines your value. So to get our elders, to support our elders in seeing them defined in a much larger context and a much larger value system versus like, oh, I've been the president, as an example, I've been the president of the NAACP for et cetera, how many years, and this is what I've done. Like, to see yourself outside of that context, to see yourself as more than just that, creates a huger space for you to shift right into your seasons. And so it's like, how do we support, to me, a lot of as a personal experience for my work is both like building, which is why my workshops are like backwards. When somebody asks me to do a workshop, I'm like, yeah, sure. So, like, this is what I'm up to, supporting the capacity for social justice lens and the personal, interpersonal, communal development and space. All right. So when I do the workshop, I'm starting from base one. I'm starting from the internal individual. It's the very belief systems that govern that person impact the way they move in the systems they're trying to either liberate in, advocate in, activate in, whatever the case may be. Yeah. How they see themselves, right, is like in direct relationship to whether they are committed to liberation or perpetuating oppression. Right. And so it's like every time I do a workshop, it's like going backwards. And sometimes people are like, wait, what? No, we want strategies to how to do it better. You can't do it better unless you understand from the gate your personal relationship in this thing, who you are. What are you defining as, successful or impactful, or what does a change agent mean for you? Do you understand that if you had little kids, that teaching and being present for them is as impactful as standing out in a rally? When you can understand that, your definition and context of self expands beyond the constructs of a societal context, like, oh, this is what you do for work, right? But that we are more than that. And so I feel like when we're having these conversations about what it can look like and what these imaginings are, we're talking about something. It's interesting because ancient in context, because when we tap into tribal movement had that as an inherent structure, right? Like the next person moved in, taught by the elder, and kind of the shift happened in that way, right? We have this oppressive patriarchy and all of that, and the narrative and the colonization. And here we are on the other side of that shit, right? Like, and having been colonized in a way that we no longer are connected to that movement, and having to find our way back to a place where we know what it looks like to move through the life cycles, right? And to allow for a vision of where we're going to be as present and integrated in our lives as possible. So even talking about that, I think this is a great time for the next question. Like, what's missing in your perspective from the work? And what I love about our conversations, and what I love about even having the time to do this with you, is that you are very connected and interconnected to the multidimensional view. And to me, that is like key to moving forward and developing our capacities. Because when we say what's missing in the work, that there's a full spectrum of viewpoint in that. So what to you is missing in your perspective?
That's a good question. I think for me, what's missing is the space and time that we need to really integrate all of our thinking. Um, Sometimes I wonder if the folks that I organize with, um, I wonder if we have the space and time to uh, do self-reflection, and feel totally seen. I think what's also missing is a real acknowledgement, like, how can we move toward a place where rhetoric is non-existent, like, I'm just tired of people being able to talk a good talk and then it doesn't actually mean anything, or doesn't translate into real values that are actualized in the action. So, folks talk great stuff about racism and then refuse to hire people of color, or, don't have accessible space for folks that are differently abled, or all of these kinds of things. I wonder if we can move past the rhetoric and really be in a space of consciousness around the multiple needs of our people, like the varying needs of our people. I think that those are some of the things that are missing, and more space for folks to do retreats and to dream. I think a lot of people have a lot of things that they are fighting against and think are wrong, and not much that they're fighting for. And to be honest, that has been a space that I have been, that concept I have been at war with for a very long time, particularly in organizing spaces where we're doing organizing, whether that be anti-prison, prison justice work, whether that be anti-racist work or anti-gentrification work, anti-police brutality work. And we can't imagine what it looks like without that stuff. As a prisoner, and I don't think that that's wrong. Like, I don't think we should have a perfect answer that will solve all questions, because if we did, then, well, we wouldn't have much of a fight. But I think we should have some ideas. I think we should be dreaming up some things, some alternatives, instead of just being like, we don't want this, we don't want that. Well, what do we want? Because, and to shift the focus back to the spiritual space, when you take something out of this world and don't intentionally replace it, the universe will replace it for you. Like, don't be confused. Everything is in balance, Everything has balance. So when something is removed, something will quickly fill its space. And we need to be intentional about what is filling that space. Otherwise, we will get something that we might not like. So I think like that to me is where I'm at and what I'm thinking about. And what's missing is the vision.
Yeah.
What does liberation look like? What is liberation from police violence look like? Are we talking about like just having a community board oversee your local police station? Are we talking about getting rid of police altogether? Are we talking about having restorative justice circles working in every community? What does that look like? Who runs it? What are the practicalities of these things?
Right.
I work in a school, so I do restorative justice circles. I'm a dean in a middle school, high school. So I do restorative justice circles. And let me tell you, it is a hell of a lot easier, simpler, and less time consuming to just suspend a kid than to actually do a restorative justice circle. Like, suspending a kid is so easy. You're just like, boop, suspended, that's it.
Right.
A restorative justice circle takes time. It
Right.
takes time. It takes staff time. It takes space. It takes class time away from the students that are involved, and it's long. It's not something that can be done in one period, 45 minutes, and that's it, Right. Restorative justice circles take time, 2-3 periods sometimes, where you're sitting in a circle really talking it out. And people are not, I don't think that we, in my community, in the communities that I'm part of, we're not ready for that, to be honest. Violent things have happened to me, and people are not interested in creating accountability. Violent things have happened in multiple organizing, social justice, advocacy, activist spaces that I'm in, and those people end up just getting excommunicated, or it passes over and people don't talk about it, and we make sure that those two people are never in the same room anymore, or whatever. But we're not in a space where people are ready to sit down and really heal, because it takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes a type of integrity that we are not familiar with. We as a community we don't know that integrity. We're not taught that. That's something that has to be taught and instilled and ingrained as a value, as something that you can persevere through, as something that is expected of you, as something that everybody can and should and will do. And we don't have that. We have a quick fix, magic bullet, get it done right away, and that's it. So the missing is, where's the vision? What are we working towards for real, for real?
You're talking and I'm like fully with you, and then I'm like, oh shit, we should probably do like a series of things we're talking about, because it's so good. It's so good. And we need, thank you for the honor of taking the time to chat with me, because we need to say this out loud, right? We need to put this out on Front Street, and I find myself, I say this more than anything else. And that is the idea that we continue to want these very quick checklist type of movement. Like, it sounds sexy. Oh my God. And I look at organizations, their vision statements and their mission statements. Oh my, so sexy. And like, you're like, yes, use that new consciousness level shit. And how is that integrated as a value system inherently within the thing itself?
Mm-hmm.
You could talk to me until the cows come home, which is a thing here in Lancaster, right? Like, until the cows come. You could talk to me about this great idea, but tell me, how does your movement create the space for it? How is it that we continue to box in human development, change, and growth into a 24-hour period where we're segmenting that into 15, 25 minutes, 35 minutes, 40? It doesn't work like that. This is relationship we're talking about in order to bring about change. And so for me, that's like a really present, and like every time I'm holding the conversation, I'm like, we want this very formulaic, right? And it's a very intellectualized way of movement. It's like, oh, this is the agenda. This is what's going to happen. This is where we're going. But the actual learning curve that it takes to get to that place, we don't even talk about. We don't talk about the time it's going to take to actually implement the values into the structures. Mm-hmm. Now, ideally, it would be inherent in each person and in each place, but that's not the case, right? And so the thing, like, the other day I talked about, like, in a workshop, what does a radical commitment to change look like? What does a radical, like this shit gotta be so solid for you that it's uncompromisable. No matter where you're at, salud.
Thank you.
No matter what you do, like it has to be a fundamental way of moving, or if not, we're gonna miss it. And we're missing it, and we have missed it, right? Like in the way that we are not able to, we're wondering how we're getting, salud. We're wondering how we're getting the results we're getting, because we're actually not looking at the structures that are perpetuating for that type of impact. So thank you for naming that, because I think I'm with you 100%. And to me, a lot of the work in conscious leadership movement and how we're showing up as healers and as teachers and as sacred space holders is like this embodiment of living both of those, or even I would say multidimensional like movement, and that we're like, yeah, we get the resistance part, but what does the liberation actually look like? How are we building into that future? Because what's going to be left if all we're doing is resisting? What are we living for? What's the point? Mm-hmm. Right? And so like really deep conversations about that, and then the actual work to see what it's going to look like, and that takes time as well, right? And we have to be committed to that. And more often than not, I find that in folks that are like tapped into these multidimensional ways of moving and living, we're living with these questions and trying to figure out like, how do we gather, like, okay, so we're talking about all these disparities and all this oppression. Okay, and then what does a step toward liberation look like? And what does communal living look like? What do these things look like? What does accessibility look like? And so on and so forth, right? So thanks for naming that. The next question, strategies. And so I usually preface like this part of like the following questions with the idea that, and my colleague Nick Myron, we talk a lot about this, because anytime we get to like the end of a workshop, we're like, okay, we recognize that people need to know what is possible, right? What comes next. And at the same time, we're so addicted and conditioned to like the checklist at the end of something, as if that was sufficient. So when I say strategies, I'm talking about the things that for you on a personal, and from your perspective are like fire to you in this work. What are things that to you are a way of movement that can be supportive to someone else listening, or whatever that resonates for you? Because I may be saying one thing, but what comes up in terms of strategies for the work for you may be another. So.
First, I want to just thank you and the viewers for bearing through I'm working on my health right now. So I'm like coughing, sneezing over here, so excuse me. Strategies. Right now, I think we just need to be present and vigilant, you know? I would say there's only one strategy that I have to offer right now in this moment, which is question everything. I once learned that the origin of the word prayer is about questioning, asking. Something about the etymology of the word prayer. And I think that's where we need to be. We need to be questioning everything that you even think is true, foundational things that you would never question it. Because why not? Because what could be the harm? If it's so good, it will withstand your inquiry.
Right.
You know? If it's so righteous, it will withstand your inquiry. But question everything. I think that's living life. That's the fun of life, is constantly exploring, reimagining, questioning everything. So I think we have to do that. We have to be reminded to do that, because we end up in these cycles where we take things for granted, um, including our privilege, including our oppression, including our internalized oppression, including all that shit. So question everything.
I like that. Right on. The next one is life support. What do folks showing up need to hear, and how can we give life? And I've been sitting for the past couple of months in my own personal life, watching and looking and sitting with the feeling of this question. Now, life support, the words are the language of of a death, and how do we keep something alive? And I think more often than not, as advocates and activists and folks showing up to do the work, in my perspective, we don't have enough life-giving and life-supporting elements. And so we're showing up so much and we're doing so much. What is it that we, in your perspective, what do we need to hear? What do we need to hear? And what are ways that you've found to inject life into the work?
We are enough. It's really that simple. I forget it.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to forget. And it's hard to find when you forget, you know. I feel like people talk, I really enjoy the framing of this question, because it's so reminiscent of like this self-care conversation that is starting to be a bit just like it's starting to be like a Thanksgiving, Christmas thing, like just some shit for people to make money off of. Like, yeah, self-care, come to my spa, spend money on my massage. Like, it's like, oh my gosh. So we are enough. And it's not enough for me to say, like, do the things that make you happy, do the things that fulfill you, because when you're in a space where times are hard and things are rough, you actually don't know what that is. And you actually forget. And so people telling me, like, do the things that make you happy, or it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I do all these things that make me happy and nothing is working right now, right? So my answer is be in community. Find your people and be with them. Everybody has people. Search your cell phone for the name that you called the most over the last 30 days. That's your people. Call them and say you need to get tea, coffee, hang out, whatever it is you do, and do that. Just that alone, like spending time with people who have similar values to you, is transformative, particularly in your darkest moments. Because we remind each other, and because part of the capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacist game is to keep us isolated and siloed, and to keep us down and keep us feeling like nobody understands, no one ever will, and to keep me on my couch watching Netflix. So the antidote to that is my community, is being out. And so, like, what So what that means for me is making sure that there is space for um, community building inside of your organizing. Um, so, because for me, from day one, organizing has always been about relationship building. Someone once said to me, they come for the cause and stay for the community.
Oh.
And I love that. It's not mine. I didn't make it up. So don't, don't attribute it to me. But it was so true for a lot of the ways in which I've entered organizing spaces. And the way that I organize is about building relationships and communities. So I don't do massive I've it's been when I have been part of campaigns that do massive base building and phone banking and all that. It's never been something that I enjoy, and it's never been something that I find myself to be really good at. I can do it, I excel at it, but it's not something that um, is how I like to do my organizing. I really like to do my organizing um, through relationships, through friendships, and calling a friend and having them show up to a meeting because of my relationship to them. And then that has, you invite one person, they invite one person, etc.
Right.
And I think like that's the most effective way to build a long lasting and sustainable movement. Um, the prisoner justice work that I had been doing, I don't want to say I'm still doing because I've been on hiatus for a little bit, but I've been doing it for about 8 years now, and literally it's been with the same people, give or take some, but the core like 9-10 people have been the same. And that I think is worthy of noting, that the core folks have been the same folks doing this work for so long that, in organizing spaces, the turnover is so high. People move away, people do this, people do that. Um, so I think there's something to be said for that. And I think what is said for that is the community building that has happened. When you have real community and when your organizing is based off of true friendships and really caring about other people, then it's sustainable. And that's liberation, right? So like, the policies will change or will not change, but inside of that, that's what my liberation looks like. And then it's what it looks like for me to be a stand and be an ally for folks who don't have that, who may be on the inside of walls, or who may be, wrapped up in thinking that they're white when they're not, or whatever.
Right. Right. Absolutely. That's beautiful. And I think, to me, that's such a sacred work, right? The work of relationship and the work of moving in that way. Because it is sustainable, because we build history together, we build change together. Like there's such, I think the dance in that is so, one, sexy, and then two, just really sacred for the sustainability of movement. Absolutely. So the last question, and then we'll roll it. Actions, what can folks do? And this, again, back to like, from your perspective and what you're seeing and considering what's needed, it's really interesting because the work that I've been committed to in my work, right, is like to broaden the definition of action, so that it offers possibilities for all folks at different stages, seasons, and cycles to engage in our collective healing, to engage in the collective work and creating also kind of like onboarding and schooling ourselves in that language, so that the person who may be licking a stamp, this is, nobody licks stamps anymore, but yeah, like, that person is as valuable as the elder who's taking the time to sit and have a conversation and show some sort of point of view, as well as the person who works all day. And one of the things I'm seeing is, I had this really quick conversation the other day with a friend of mine. It was like, what happens when your job that you get paid for is part of the work, and yet you still feel like you're not doing another part of the work? And then, like, when does it ever, like, is there ever an end to that, right? And so
when
as
your
you're,
job is your community service, you're like,
yeah,
when am I supposed to do community service? I do it 40 hours a week, or sometimes 80 hours a week.
right. And like this, I think there's like this whole like spectrum of conversation to redefine it, and while honoring the distinctions. And I had this conversation like in the red tent recently, where I was like, around racial justice and what like self-care, and what's the conversation for people of color in that taking a break, stepping back, having reflective time, being able to come in and nourish and kind of heal up is an important thing to do. And that's different than what white people need to be doing, and how they need to be exercising the muscle and getting out there and interrupting the conversations and so on and so forth. And that we needed to be honest about the distinctions in that, because if not, we won't be able to do this sustainably. And so I feel the same way, like, about action-oriented conversations, because for some people, when it is your job and you are so fortunate that you can get financial payment for doing that shit, you could pay your light bill. That's what that's what I'm talking about. I'm not, you could pay your light bill. You may need to take the time that once that's done, you may need to take that time to nourish, to fill the tank, to take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, and be supported in that, and not feel guilt, or not because you're not, it doesn't look like something else. And so when I'm saying action, I have this like stupid commitment to broadening what that can look like. And what does that mean for every cycle stage, age, and kind of spectrum? Because I don't think we do that enough. So when you think of action from your perspective, what are things that what are possibilities folks can live into? How can they play with that? What can it look like? Maybe outside of the traditional responses. And that's not to say the traditional responses are valuable as well. So the spectrum is just open. But what can action possibly look like?
I think I feel like action has been woven in throughout our conversation.
Yeah.
The action is questioning everything. The action is building new ritual. The action is reclaiming old ritual. The action is being present, is envisioning. The action is being in community, being a stand for other people, checking in with your people, checking in with your community. I have folks check in on me, and that's beautiful. Like, it's not something that's said or like been like, hey, I need a check-in, but literally, yes, like, I've just been not doing well this winter, and literally yesterday a friend texted me and was like, hey, I'm just checking in with you, what's going on? Like, that is the work, that is like showing up for someone else in a way that you don't need to I totally get this, like, concepts, and I've been really present to like folks who have babies or are differently abled or have any number of health impairments or ailments or what have you, or folks who, you know, are working class poor and work, you know, 2 jobs. They can't show up to your freaking organizing meeting. Like, no. You know,
Right.
like me now at 23, I might have gone out on a rainy day to an action where it's, you know, 40 degrees outside. Me at 31, no, I'm not gonna do that. Like, I love you and this cause is important, and I'm not at a space in my life where I'm going to do that. So it's about being thoughtful and committed and present, and figuring out what you can do, whether that is be in the streets or be on somebody's board of directors, because there is a fuck ton of people out here who are in the streets who are trying to get nonprofits and 501c3 statuses and need people with your skills to be on a board and help them put together an organization, or consult with around how to make career moves because they're unhappy and they want to build in more social justice, or they want to bring anti-racism to their organizing or to their organization or what have you. I think there are so many ways that it's really about being in the inquiry and being present to what shows up and offering the skills that you have. Like I said, we are enough, and like remembering that, because if we are enough, then we have everything that we need. And then what is it that you have that we need that you're being selfish and hiding? Like, you know, stopping and hiding, we need you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that one of the things I love about having this conversation is I wrote it as a blog post, and then I was like, I'm going to put this on the shelf for a minute, because the context of this conversation to me requires an awareness, because I find in activism and in advocacy, there's a lot of language around, and one time I said to somebody, in the middle of a workshop, I was like, this is my job. My job is, if we are pushing toward one end of the spectrum so much and we're in a polarity, like we're all the way on the opposite, my job is to break that space open so that we can find our balance in that, right? So I'm gonna knock, and I'm gonna pick at the pieces until that's broken open. And I feel the same way about like watching the movement of activism and advocacy and the pressures internally. And this is kind of like the internalized conversation around the hierarchy of activism and what's legit, what's not legit, and kind of all the spectrum of that language. And it began to concern me, because if we hone that into just looking like in one way, which we're like notorious for as human beings, like we like create this box and we label it and we categorize it, and then it has to look this one way. How do we, in the spirit of enoughness, have a deeper conversation about, like, you know, for somebody who, and back to the idea of like muscle, exercising the muscle, for somebody who's not used to speaking up and interrupting something, because they're afraid of about how they're going to be perceived, that's the person that needs to engage that very thing more, and to have the lens and the discerning eye to say, oh, I need to step into that a little bit more and forget about what people think about me. Screw that. I'm going to, you know, say what needs to be said, fill in the blank, right? Like that's one thing. And then the person who has PTSD because they've had a host of experiences and traumatic informed experiences that create a whole different type of environment around the act of stepping up or speaking up. Their activism or their way of engaging may look a little bit different, and it needs to. right? And so I feel like there's this spectrum of like conversations that we need to have around what this can all look like and how we're engaging in it and seeing the value in all the pieces, both in our modern language of the introvert and the extrovert, right? Like people are like, well, I hear this notoriously, I'm not a leader, which is why I'm all out to deconstruct and dismantle leadership. I'm like, all right, boo, you have a sphere of influence and we all do. And whatever that world looks like you're in it. Yeah. And how you engage in it, whether you're using words, whether they're physical actions, you have in you the capacity to lead in a space. We all do. Little people do. People do. Like we all do. And it's how do we understand that and dismantle that in a way that we're stepping into that fully and seeing our existence as an act, right? And then really checking into our own capacities to show up for somebody who's on a board, for somebody who's doing the work, for somebody who's, whose schedule's like super loaded. How are they sticking more onto that? How is that an act of enoughness or care? How is that sustainable? How are you going to do that 10 years from now? And those are the questions I'm like, how are you doing that? Are you even making love? What's that like? Do you experience pleasure, or like what is the point and the purpose? So thank you for offering like that expansion, because to me it's becoming, and this is for folks who are like showing up to do the work, it's becoming a challenge that I'm watching, right? Especially when we're getting into places where we're having like marches and we're having protests and rallies and people want to physically, in a very present way, be at something and be doing something.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to distinguish between what you feel the need to be stepping into, and then another evaluating for themselves what they need to be stepping into and or not.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's this also like a whole bunch of strings hanging and kind of not being able to be fully present or complete in things because we're so like fractured out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like I feel like there's a huge need for spaces where we can talk about that and start reevaluating if that type of over stimulated, action oriented movement is even sustainable, and how do we live in alignment. I feel like there's a lot there around the self-care of an activist and an advocate and folks in the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh my gosh. It's been so wonderful. I think, when I think about doing this stuff, I often think about, that idea of like being a fly on the wall. Where we're like, if we could just be a fly on the wall in that conversation, and we're having so many of these conversations on like just our personal levels and really checking in. And so thank you for the honor of sitting via video and all the way from New York, and really laying it down, because I think, and one of the things that excited me about our conversation was that I know that you're living in an intersection of being a healer, and in the community and in the collective, and that particular like integration and intersection is becoming important. And to me, in our very intellectualized America, we've segmented leaders and healers as a separate thing, and forgetting the medicine origin of all of this, because we've evolved so quickly that we kind of lost that one, accountability for the part that we play in that collective, and two, our ancestral ties to this, because I think, for me, we're an expression of that. For our generation, I'm the medicine woman in my family line for my generation, and so are you. And so to kind of close up, and this is like This is an extra question.
Bonus round.
Ding, 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 ding. What does the work of the healer in you and the medicine person in you, what does that look like? What is that feeling like nowadays? And how is that expressing, especially thinking in terms of its connection to your ancestral roots and stuff like that?
Figuring that out. I'm figuring that out. I think that I think it looks a lot like finding spaces for Jewish women of color to connect and build community. It looks like me just finding those women. It looks like me listening deeply to what those women need in this moment, and just being present for them right now, and showing up. I think that's the best thing I can do right now, is just show up and listen, and be present. And the rest of the work will come and be an invitation, to my work in the larger, broader community. So that the healing, that they are especially welcome to the healing work that I'm doing in the broader community.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. I find that I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and as we were talking, I was telling her, I was like, I realized, which this is like, there's the thing that your head does, your intellect, your mind can take in information and kind of assimilate information and do all that thing. And then it's another thing when shit drops into your soul and into your like spirit realm. And I had said to her, I said, I realized meaning that it dropped into my spirit realm, that I'm always, until the end of my days, going to make an herbal tea blend and be giving somebody a stash of herbal blends to take as soul medicine, as physical medicine. I was like, this is, it was like an existential thing. I was like, this is my life. I am going to always be making a tincture along with a healing session on my Reiki table, along with the work. Like, this is me. This is like this work that I'm committed to and flows as part of my contribution to the collective, and also kind of that generational and ancestral connection, in that I'm creating space even for my ancestors to be healed by the act of acknowledging and sacred space creation. And so for me, when I'm looking at how we're moving, and I love watching us, oh my God, I love watching us. I'm so fascinated by how we're moving and the decisions that we have to make in our times, and what our healing work actually looks like. And the power of that very deep listening, and multidimensional presencing that we're showing up to do, right? And how we're also like simultaneously in this integrative way of living, like showing up to create space for our ethnic narratives.
Yeah.
And looking at what that looks like now, and what does that look like decolonized. Trying to listen for the reclamation while recognizing that we have to show up for creation in our time. And so I've been kind of sitting with that as, as we're showing up. And I know you and I were both doing the Kohenet training, the Hebrew priestess training, and really kind of a natural fit and suiting to what we are and what we do anyway, right? It's like, all right, these are more tools for the tool belt, or medicine for the medicine basket.
Yeah.
as we move through our communities. And so thank you for sharing that, because I feel like we all have this very distinctive, unique way of movement and bringing collective healing that includes our own healing, right? And our own healing is not separate from the collective. We actually, our work actually heals us as well as the collective as we move and show up, and that looks different for all of us. And I think that's important to name. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here with us and bringing your wisdom and your presence. And I send you health and strength and wholeness. As your body's like, oh, please, can we just rest?
I'm about to go put the humidifier over my face right now.
Yeah, because that's what the work looks like. Our faces and stuff, just like self-care and self-nurturing, to a body that's constantly in it with us.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly in it with us. So Shoshana, where can people find you if they wanted to find you and wanted to connect with you, if that's something that you want to offer up to the table?
Yeah, folks can find me on Facebook, Shoshana Akua. And they can find me, just like email me, Shoshana, SHOSHANABRWN @gmail.com. Yeah, real basic.
Yeah.
I don't have any fancy websites or anything like that.
Yeah, and I feel like my colleague, my friend Nick Myron, in the other interview, I'm like, Nick, how can they find you? He was like, Facebook.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't have no branding. The only brand I have is my curly hair. That's it.
The branding in its original form, right? Branding in its original form. Well, thank you so much for honoring us. And I feel like we'll have many more conversations anyways. And have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, P.
Love you, and have a healthful, restorative rest.